Thank you, everybody. So in our session, we've been talking about angler knowledge, and we're talking about knowledge systems that are observational, experiential, and share among anglers, and they're inherently valuable. They can be interwoven, as nicely shown by this paper in 2IC, with scientific knowledge with profound benefits for conservation. And I want to make the argument here that we probably need to reframe the way we think about fisheries knowledge, the broader ILEK, UN wording, so that our fisheries knowledge doesn't stand alone as an isolated subfield. So I want to address three things about fisheries knowledge that we want to point out. The first thing is that it's valuable. We know we have knowledge gaps for data poor and data limited fisheries, such as catch and release fisheries. This knowledge can complement or very interestingly challenge what we know from our fisheries and standard scientific knowledge and monitoring. It can lead to hypothesis generation. It can lead to multiple lines of evidence that can give us confidence on the status and trends of our fisheries, as pointed out by this quintessential paper that says, ignore fisheries knowledge, has missed the boat back from 2000. Number two, it's highly accurate, since in the past decade there have been about 80 papers published showing the validation and the accuracy and the match between angler-derived fishing trends and those derived from other monitoring. Here's two examples on lingcod from the Pacific Northwest in the US, and Brazil showing the match in abundance, in trends from angler-derived data versus the data from standardized sampling techniques. And number three is that ILEK is needed. Most of our fisheries lack formal assessments. They will never be assessed formally. 80% of our stocks are unassessed. You can see those are in poor condition and need management. We need management decisions, yet we don't have stock assessments. So data poor assessment methods are critical, particularly those that are derived from our ILEK. So we've been working on ILEK with our favorite stakeholders and knowledge holders, which are fishing guides from southern Florida, the flats and fish for snook in the coastal areas, and tarpon, bonefish. And here's Captain Dave Perkins telling us over drinks and maps that the seagrass die-off that we saw in 2015, in fact, is much larger than we monitored. And we're trying to smile, but we're dying inside because he's telling us that it's a much bigger problem than we anticipated because we're not monitoring it everywhere that we need to. So in 2015, Ed published this review saying, fisheries knowledge has failed to become integrated into fishery science, and we need to do better. And in his review, he said, there's been a lack of mainstream acceptance of ILEK and fisheries data. It's highly qualitative with non-standardized methods, which is completely okay because we have these social roots, social theory roots that come in from sociology, from anthropology, but it really contrasts the systematic and quantitative ways in which we assess and manage our fisheries, right? So there's a mismatch in data quality. And he said, we need to do better, and we should have improved methods that elicit quantitative knowledge. And he said, we hope that we see a fifth wave of fisheries knowledge that is quantitative, management, friendly, and we see the prevalence of this knowledge into fisheries management. So in our study, we wanted to know how is ILEK being used in fisheries today since Ed's review. And we conducted a literature review just where Ed left off in 2014 up to 2024, like another decade of research, asking three simple questions. How is ILEK accessed in fisheries? What is it used for? And is it getting more quantitative that can allow for more insertion into fisheries management? You can see the increase in those 397 studies that we used in the review. We found that ILEK is being used in fisheries in 98 countries. Surprisingly, is Brazil the least charged. Do we have any Brazilian researchers here? No? Okay. Couple? Yeah? Okay, so Brazil, biggest incidence of studies, and then followed by US and Mexico. And then you can see the breakdown of where we're doing these studies that use ILEK. And you can see that influential of the roots of artisanal fisheries, where this started, and small-scale fisheries and recreational fisheries are very, very low second last, very underutilized, and gleaner fisheries or harvesting fisheries and aquaculture and multiple stakeholder sector fisheries. Here's the breakdown of those 397 studies shown as the kind of knowledge type that is targeting and how was it obtained, is it qualitative or quantitative? And I'll point out a couple things here. First of all, most of the studies are ethnographic and qualitative, asking what do fishers know? And you can see that those are qualitative studies. 70% of the studies are qualitative. Studies that address management are very a minority, only 10%. And those are also on the qualitative side. If we look at studies that have quantitative assessment sort of studies that are most important in our fisheries, what are the trends, what are the catches, what's happening over time? These type of assessment studies are only 19% of those studies, and most of them are semi-quantitative. Only 10% are quantitative. If we look over time across that decade that we review studies and say, well, are we getting better at quantitative studies and making those more management relevant? You can see that over time from 2014 to 2024, we're just doing more what do fishers know studies. No increase in the assessment studies, and they remain qualitative, right? We're doing more qualitative studies over time. The quantitative line is flat. So what kind of studies are we doing, and how was the data obtained? So we saw that semi-structured interviews were most common in this data set, but there's a huge variation in sample size in the surveys. You can see that mean of 161 plus or minus 490. And the best way to explain that was not by the purpose of the study or what the study was trying to do, but by the sampling method, curiously enough. So you can see here in this conditional inference tree that if we look at studies that are large, have large samples, or online surveys, as you might expect, that get into the 400 or 500 subjects, whereas studies that are face-to-face, multiple techniques, over the mail, telephone, those tend to be much smaller, under 400. If they're semi-quantitative, they're in the order of 200 respondents. If they are qualitative, they're in the order of about 100 respondents. So how big of a sample do you need if you want to get into this business of talking to your anglers and finding out what they know? Well, 62% of the studies gave no justification for sample sizes. 22 said we targeted a subset of the local population of anglers, but not necessarily a sense of how big that population should be or how big of a subset you should get. And then 8% said as many fishers as we can, which we've done ourselves. So no fault there. We've done that before, been there, done that. So how many fishers do you really need to get accurate information in an ILK setting that is quantitative? And here we can lean on this idea of the wisdom of the crowds. And if you're here earlier for Ben's talk, he mentioned this. And this is the idea that a collection of diverse and independent individuals, their judgment provides a reliable aggregate number of the true value. And this is exemplified in this Striper study, where just 33 diverse fishers can predict the size distribution of the fishery. And this deviation is actually due to the sampling, not to the number from the crowd is actually the right number, as the authors describe in their discussion, or they estimate that's the case. And you just don't need that high numbers. So, and this is a fishery that's 180,000 participants. So we went back and we played a little bit around with this idea of how many fishers do we need. We had a survey of bone fishing quality that we had taken back in 2019 that asked how has the bone fishing quality changed over time, 1975 to 2015 in South Florida. And we went back and took a rarefaction approach and sampled randomly this population in the survey to try to figure out how many surveys do we need to get a straight answer. So what we see here is the sample size versus the number of unique responses, looking for that information saturation. And you can see that at 130 respondents, 62% of the sample size, we get 100% of the variability and the response of the population. We can go down to 66 respondents, which is 31%. And at that point, we have 75% of the unique responses. And then we can go down to 20 respondents if we have captured 50% of the responses. Now, maybe more interesting is what's the accuracy of the information? So if we compare the response and the big survey from the entire population of the 210 respondents, and we say, well, how close does a smaller population get to that? We can look at this error rate, mean error rate that we can see, and you can see that line for 5% error. And when we go to 66 respondents, we are 97% accurate. And when we go to 20 respondents, we are 93% accuracy compared to the full sample size. In random crowds, you can see here the two lines comparing the most experienced crowds. We tend to think that the most experienced anglers are the most important knowledge holders. And our studies show that the random crowd can do just as well, the diversity, as the more experienced crowds. Maybe a little inkling that when you get really, really small at 20, a little bit better, but it's not significantly different between the experienced crowd and the random crowd for the accuracy. So takeaways. ILEK in our review shows that it's still qualitative. It lacks standardized methods for how-to protocols for simple things like sample size. The wisdom of the crowds can be a really helpful sort of principle that we can lean on and think about how do we get to smaller sample sizes that are meaningful, and then remains underutilized in recreational fisheries. So we have this gap, right, where ILEK researchers need to make fisheries knowledge more accessible, more quantitative, better inserted into fisheries management, and fisheries scientists need to open their mind to the value of this data. And if you were here for Ben's talk, is how do we bridge this gap, right? And there's many ways to do this, but one of these is sort of this best catch approach, where we can use best catch data, and we've done this with bonefish, and recreate 60 years of sightings and size for bonefish in South Florida. And with that, we love to collaborate with you if this is exciting. Thank you for your attention.
Very interesting talk, Jen. Thank you. Any questions from the floor?
Thank you very much for this very nice overview. You cited the Amin-Por paper.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to outline that it's not about just sample size, but
Yeah.
it's about you capture the diversity.
Diversity.
Of use.
Yeah.
So we found in that particular paper it was not a simple task to estimate stock size, but causal relationships.
Yes.
That you really needed to have a crowd model of the managers, a crowd model of the anglers.
That's right.
So you needed these subgroups, and then the pool was the best.
Then you had a really good wisdom, yeah.
If you just went for the anglers, it was actually way off.
Yeah. In our data, if you go for the oldest, the most experienced anglers, it's not any better than a random crowd. Mm-hmm. Similar idea, but we were just doing anglers in our survey.
Any other questions? Probably following on from, sorry, back it off the
Oh, no, you.
following on from Robert's, if you're just going to the anglers, if there is a perceived outcome they'd like to achieve, but you're assuming there's might be some new management that would come in if they're saying that the stocks are depleted, can you capture that?
Yes, yes. And part of our survey asked, where do you want the fishery to be as targets, right, on those trends? So we have reference points, and we did that with a post-survey workshop, going back to the guides and anglers and asking them, how do these trends look? Are these valid, right? These are all your answers together. And then what do you think the fishery should be? And what's attainable? Ben, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Yeah.
They actually suggested numbers that were lower than what it currently is.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
Very modest numbers.
Yeah, they're like, it's probably better than we want it to be.
Yeah, it's obviously an issue with commercial fishing and paper fish, sort of over-reporting or under-reporting based on a percentage of grateful management outcomes. So yeah, it's interesting. Any other questions from the floor? We've got time for perhaps one more.
Thank you.
Just one quick one. Kind of thinking, it's like a chicken and the egg thing. You were saying you want to do more of this to stick it into stock assessments, but then on the other hand, there's zero stock assessments for most of the stocks.
Yeah.
So do you have, from your experience, any use case where you could demonstrate, oh, you actually captured this data and then you were able to actually, get a stock assessment running?
So I don't know that I said to use it in stock assessments, but you can use them in lieu of stock assessments, right? These abundance estimates. You could insert them as your abundance metric, right? If you wanted to. But I don't think we're proposing that this is for stock assessments. We're proposing we should find out how many fish we have out there and how do we manage them before we have the perfect stock assessments or the imperfect stock assessments we usually have, right? That we need to figure out how many fish do we have out there? What's the condition of the fishery? Yeah. Yeah.